All right. Hello and welcome to this extremely special event as part of UVA's assessment of China's Belt and Road Initiative project. My name is Tayyab Safdar. I'm a postdoc here at the East Asia Center. And we are extremely pleased to be joined by Sophia Kidd, who is an associate research fellow at Sichuan University's College of Literature and Journalism. Sophia has a very rich background. She's worked at the University of Bochum, working on political semiotics and Chinese art criticism, and she's also worked at other German universities as well. And in this year, 2021, her upcoming book is going to be published by Palgrave Macmillan, and the title of the book is Culture Paves the New Silk Roads. And today's talk is, I think, also inspired by the book as well. And today, Sophia is going to talk about the new Silk Roads. And one of the main, sort of factors, or one of the main areas as far as the new Silk Road is concerned, and one of those areas which perhaps has not been very well covered, which looks at people-to-people connectivity and its links to the other four major areas that the new Silk Road or the Belt and Road Initiative, whichever way you want to put it, sort of addresses. So it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you, Sophia. And Sophia will be talking for about 30 to 45 minutes. If you've got any questions during her talk, you are more than welcome to post them in the chat tab. If you hold your questions till the end and just raise your hands, we can then ask you to introduce yourself and ask your questions. So without further ado, I open the floor to you, Sophia.
Thank you very, very much, Tayyab. And thank you to Dorothy and to Brian and everybody at University of Virginia for your excellent programming and being such a great team to work with in preparing for tonight's talk. I do recommend everybody to go onto the University of Virginia website, onto the Assessment of Belt and Road Belt and Road Initiative project webpage. There are videos there that are archived, announcements of upcoming events. And I found this channel to be one of the best sources for my own research with up-to-date current information from people who are in the field, boots on the ground, and also have interesting theoretical angles. So I was wanting to share my screen, Tayyab, and can I go ahead and do that from?
Please do. It's over to you. I'm going to stop my camera screen as well, just to make sure that you're the only one who's there.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, so I am hoping that you are all seeing a screen with a gray background and the Sichuan University insignia. Somebody give me some signal if you are not. Okay, I'm going to assume that we are good to go on that. My name is Sophia Kidd. I'm an associate research fellow at Sichuan University. You're looking at the Sichuan University insignia. This is my alma mater, actually. I did my master's and my PhD at Sichuan University. I matriculated fully in the Chinese program. It wasn't the Chinese program, it was actually the classics program. I was the first Anglo-American to be in the program, and my thesis and dissertation were both written in Chinese. So I'm really, if you want to know how I ended up going from classics to talking about China's global governance and the new Silk Roads and people-to-people connectivity, my email is there. I have two, my institutional email as well as a personal one, and I invite you to contact me and we can dialogue about that. I love to talk about that. All right, then moving on. Oh, we go back to okay, just a moment. Okay, so today I'm presenting research from it's a slice of my book, Culture Paves the New Silk Roads, which is forthcoming with Palgrave Macmillan with the Contemporary East Asian Visual Cultures, Society and Politics series. It's a new series. The first book in this series was by Oning called Utopia in Practice. And it's about the internal emigration movement that's happening in China, where a lot of urbanites are moving to the countryside and rediscovering the values and the treasures of their own culture. Culture Paves the New Silk Roads uses an integrated culture-based approach to studying Chinese political economy of culture in New Silk Road spaces. This approach reconceptualizes people-to-people connections, Minxin Xiangtong, as more than rhetorical flourish in NSR development. Indeed, I maintain that these cultural bonds are the most important element. Well, we have a very exciting little PPT. It has its own voice. I maintain these cultural bonds as the most important element of this global initiative. This book lays the groundwork for understanding people-to-people bonds, political economy of culture in China, the notion of cultural export and value chains of culture, contemporary art in China's southwest frontier New Silk region, cultural centers along the Old and New Silk Roads, cultural policy along the New Silk Roads, China's millennial creative class and the New Silk Roads, as well as possible New Silk Roads futures. Now, I will not be able to get into all of that today. Today, I'm sticking with the second chapter in the book, which actually lays out a typology and a brief analysis of people-to-people connectivity, the fifth pillar of the New Silk Roads. So people-to-people programs, human resource development, aid development, development of public goods, agricultural advancement, climate change programs, all of these programs, according to a white paper just released, outnumber industry and economic infrastructure projects. As I learned from Dr. Liaquat Ali Shah, the head of Policy Division for Trade and Industry Cooperation at the Center of Excellence of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, who spoke in the Assessment of Belt and Road project last week, I learned that infrastructure and energy projects are very well underway or completed or very progressed in their planning. And so the funding and programming for socio-economic programs will increase in percentage. Thus, if claims made in this white paper are true for the period of 2013 to 2018, then that trend can be expected to remain at least stable, if not strengthened. I am presenting my research today because I find this area of the Belt and Road, or the New Silk Roads, to be understudied. Min Ye's book, The Belt Road and Beyond, she has this great quote: listen to the central government, learn from Europe and America, and do your own job. And this was stated by a private entrepreneur. So I'm drawing your attention to a typology of business models, not just top-down state-owned enterprises, but also privately owned enterprises and also public-private partnerships. Also in Min Ye's book is this wonderful, wonderful table showing comparative trends in Chinese state and private firms. So if you just look at the top left and top right figures, we have in 2000, 53,500 SOEs, or state-owned enterprises. Those are entirely public, and less than half as many private. So then fast forward to 2015, and the numbers are very much switched, and you see 19,000 plus state-owned enterprises and over 200,000 private. So now picture that as not just happening abstractly within China, but happening along the New Silk Roads. So when you talk about the business being done along the New Silk Roads, you're not just talking about Chinese top-down companies. You're also looking at private enterprises and public-private partnerships. And that's important to look at the diversity of business models. So One Belt, One Road was the very first translation of this project. It's a word-for-word translation of Yidai Yilu, one road, one belt, one road. And then later on, because there was confusion, people didn't understand what is it, one road and one belt, because it looks a lot more complicated than that. Well, it is indeed many belts and many roads. And then the addition of the word initiative was very portentous because it explained to people that this was something that China was initiating and wanting to have bilateral and multilateral cooperation from funding and planning and implementation. So why do I use New Silk Roads? Well, I'm not alone in doing so. China, in their own media, when they're talking about Yidai Yilu or One Belt, One Road, when they want to evoke the cultural imaginary or even talk about people-to-people programs, then they often use Xin Sichuan Lu or New Silk Roads. So I'm also wanting to evoke the cultural imaginary in my work. Buttressed against two dates, September and October of 2013 at Nazarbayev University in Astana and at Indonesian Parliament, respectively, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced first the Overland Silk Road Economic Belt, and later the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. These new Silk Roads are an expanded iteration of a network of trade routes conceived separately by China and its competitors in the region, Japan, India, and Australia. Interestingly enough, President Joe Biden will be meeting with these countries known as the Quad. These competitors have been in talks with the US to build an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative, an Indo-Pacific strategy which would deepen cooperation amongst regional democracies in a bid to contain China's own developments in the Asia-Pacific region. The most developed of these Indo-Pacific strategies at present sees the US engaging with India in building a new Silk Road to counter China's move for consolidating power. As of 2019, India had withdrawn any commitment to the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar branch of China's overland economic belt, leading to this Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, otherwise known as BCIM, not being included as one of the 35 planned corridors announced in April 2019 at the Second Belt and Road Forum. Later that year, however, agreements were made between the 4 participating nations to continue building this network, only not under the name of BRI. So this is also important to notice. There are a lot of projects that are under the umbrella of BRI that are not BRI. And then again, there are many projects that are not under the umbrella of BRI that are BRI. So, or the New Silk Roads. So that's an interesting little fact right there. Many of you have already seen lots of maps of the New Silk Roads. The yellow routes are the overland economic belt. And then the blue are the roads, actually. They're on the sea. That's the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. Now, this map doesn't really do the project justice. It leaves out all of the developments along the west coast of Africa. It leaves out the developments in Latin America. It leaves out the developments in South America. It leaves out the developments in the Arctic Silk Roads, where China comes quite close to Canada and the northern border. And it also leaves out the digital Silk Roads, which are, as we all know, networks are everywhere. So this map is just a very basic map. So today's talk focuses on Minxin Xiangtong and people-to-people relations. Just to break down the etymology a little bit for you, Minxin Xiangtong, the 4 characters that make up this pillar. Min are the people. Xin is one of those wonderful Chinese words that means both heart and mind. So the hearts and mind of people. And Xiangtong Tong, and this is very important, I'll touch upon this again, but Tong is how we translate pillar, but Tong is not a pillar. Tong is a channel, a conduit, an actual flux. And Xiang is two polarities, or it could be more than just two. So Xiangtong is a flow. It's a flux of energy. So there's or communication. So there's communication between people's hearts and minds. And that's what people-to-people relations. It's translated as people-to-people, but just wanted to let you know a little bit about the Chinese etymology. Also, I wanted to mention, because this will possibly come up for you, I come at this from a cultural perspective, a culture-based integrated approach. My training is in the Chinese classics, and yeah, just wanted to put that out there. People-to-people connections tend to be the least talked about of the New Silk Road pillars. The other four, policy coordination, facilities connectivity, unimpeded trade, and financial integration, are explicitly political and economic in nature, but also implicitly cultural in aspect. We may gain the sense that the New Silk Roads are built primarily for political and economic reasons, and perhaps find it easy to think about the New Silk Roads without referring to this fifth pillar at all. What I'm presenting today is a slice from my book, and I am presenting it because it is understudied, as I mentioned earlier. I also want to mention, because this is where my book goes after chapter 2, it goes into discussing the political economy of culture. And for this, I draw upon my experience in Chengdu, the capital city of Sichuan, where my university is. I worked with arts professionals in design, real estate, museums, galleries, and universities. And from this cultural perspective, I make observations about political economy in China. So I was an arts writer for Yishu Journal of Contemporary Art for 10 years, and most likely moving forward, their editorial staff has changed structure a little bit, and they're having a wonderful exhibit in Beijing right now at the Inside Outside Museum. Top right here is a magazine called 1314 or 1314. And this magazine has been for the last 15 years covering avant-garde and experimental art, as well as design and creative economy, creative sector developments. And it's been doing it. It hasn't made a penny in 15 years. It's out of pocket. It's paid for by Fu Bing, the owner and CEO of Black Ant in Chengdu in Sichuan province, the largest design firm in Sichuan province. Lower right, you'll see a performance event that took place. An Israeli artist came for the Up On International Performance Art Festival, which happens almost every year and brings artists in from all over the world. It is entirely privately funded, privately run, as most of the events that I've been a part of, have written about, have curated. It's pretty much all private and sometimes public-private, that perhaps will get some media coverage. But sometimes it's by hook or by crook. We just get it done and we fund it however we can get it funded. But you can see that like these kinds of, the Israeli artist came and talked about, told stories of her life, of the sadness and loss and death in her life. So the students and other arts professionals and teachers, Chinese that were there, were then exposed to these conversations put forth, or stories being told by an Israeli artist. So these are the kinds of people-to-people connectivities that I feel are really of value, and as I'm going to be discussing in this talk, aren't necessarily top-down structure of people-to-people connectivity. Here on the left, I'll get back to people-to-people quickly. On the left is an artist, Wang Yanxing, and he is from Gansu province. He is an ethnic minority. And for him, on top, so he has this performance art piece with a table, and on top of the table is white flour, lots of white flour, which for him represents history. And he puts his face into the white flour and picks his face back up, and it's then the image of it is kind of ghostly, and it's sort of a little bit abstract. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about it. Upper right-hand corner is an artist from Austria, and she's doing a piece that is a critique of materialism, both in global society, really. She's not calling out any one society. And the poster for the OBOR Festival is there in the lower right-hand corner. So the new Silk Roads, composed of 5 pillars: policy coordination, facilities connectivity, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people to people. It's important to note what's being lost in translation between tong and pillar. So the Chinese use the word tong, and we use the word pillar. Here, a state of flux, an exchange of energy, is fixed and objectified as pillar. This mechanism of reducing relational structures, and this relational structures, this interconnectivity of systems, is very important in Chinese thought. So reducing these relational interconnected systems and structures into objects, this very reduction is at the heart of much misunderstanding between Chinese and Western cultures. While tong is a component character in each of the pillars, translation of NSR's channels into pillars leads to a misunderstanding of the relational nature of each of NSR's 5 New Silk Road's 5 engagement areas as mere instrumental props or pillars holding up an overarching structure or portico, such as economic, military, and/or cultural hegemony. So now please indulge me just a little bit. I promise this is not my theoretical backbone. But being educated in China and spending lots of time in China, over 20 years to date, more than half my life, you can't think about the 5 pillars, or I'm sure it can be done, but thinking of the 5 pillars easily invokes this other very important system of thinking in China, which is 5-element theory. It's most prevalent today in Chinese traditional medicine, but it is, if you go back into classic texts, historical texts, literary texts, it is actually a very important part of Chinese socioeconomic thought, political thought, historical thought, geographical thought. So I draw an analogy between qi, and qi, the flow of qi is indicative of health and balance. And I draw the analogy between qi and culture. So by analogy, when there is cultural flow between the 5 pillars or tong of the Belt and Road Initiative or the New Silk Roads, there will be balance. So what I do really rely upon theoretically in my work, specifically in this chapter, there are other books that are much more important for other chapters, but for chapter 2, I really rely upon Tim Winter's Geocultural Power, published 2018 by University of Chicago Press, and the Belt and Road and Beyond, State Mobilized Globalization in China by Minxin. That's Cambridge University Press, 2020. So in Tim Winter's book, in this very important book, there is an analysis of the Silk Roads as a geocultural imaginary and a form of geocultural power. It is argued that the Silk Roads provide China with a unique platform for exercising its geocultural advantage. And through history, culture, and heritage, we are seeing the forces of great power diplomacy being exerted. That's a quote from his book. Tim Winter's research is mainly confined to top-down people-to-people relations. That is, cultural policy, which is top-down, government designed, implemented. My own research focuses more on how top-down people-to-people programming meshes with grassroots or bottom-up cultural movements, narrowing in on Southwest China's private museum sector. Tim Winter's move away from soft power towards geocultural power discourse is fundamental in my work, displacing the soft, hard power axis. In Minye's book, China's own New Silk Roads are best understood through the lens of state-mobilized globalization, most similar to Japan's own state-centered market development in the New Silk Road regions. In this way, NSR can be seen as a continuation of China's earlier Western development program, 西部大开发, and China's goes global policy, 走出去计划. These national strategies have been in play for over 2 decades and operate in tandem with China's New Silk Roads, with each strategy conceived at a time of economic crisis, each rhetorically ambiguous as well as inconsistent in praxis, precipitating globalization and market expansion inside China. Chinese strategies in Central Asia, as in other New Silk regions, have picked up the tools used by other nations such as India, Japan, and South Korea. Tools in China's kit include market, state, as well as cultural integration, and it's this last element of the New Silk Roads that we'll be focusing on below. Another book that I rely heavily upon is the Book of Han, the book of the Western Han Dynasty, covering a period from 206 BCE to 06 in the Common Era. This chapter is a little bit blurry, but it is the Di Li Zhi, which is a treatise on geometry, which is the most fascinating section of each of the 24 official dynastic histories. In this chapter is laid out an economic geography, a cultural geography. There are other chapters. There's even what's called a literary treatise, which lists the canon of all extant books, all books in the empire, and as well as all books that are known to have been lost in the empire. So the book itself, as Chinese history tends to be, is very systemic in nature, very interdisciplinary. And this informs my work and my approach. So what are people-to-people connections? What does it include? Well, it includes 6 things. I'm not going to go, I'm going to mention each of them briefly, but I'm going to dive deep in academic exchange because I have the most personal experience with that. My own education being a project of earlier iterations of people-to-people as part of the Western Development Program or the China Goes Global program. And my position at Sichuan University is now funded actually by academic exchange as part of the people-to-people connectivity. So the first of the 6 areas of P2P, so when I say P2P, that's people-to-people connections, is health assistance. And this is probably like, if you go to the English language or even the Chinese language portal for the One Belt, One Road, the China's official one, and you go to the people-to-people pillar, it will almost all be COVID medical training, COVID relief, face mask diplomacy, and so forth. But it's important to point out that aside from this, medical research and training internationally China has been doing this very successfully as public diplomacy or cultural diplomacy for some time now. I'll give 2 examples because China celebrates 2 systems of medicine. One is the Western allopathic tradition that we know and use today here in America. And then there's also the traditional Chinese medicine that they have celebrated for 6,000 years, or it's hard to say exactly how long. But For example, in Israel, there are great inroads that have been made in Chinese traditional medicine. There is a whole sort of cabal of acupuncturists that some of them were trained in China, and they are celebrating Chinese tradition and using and utilizing, have practices and patients where they use traditional Chinese medical theory and praxis. As for Western medicine, at my school, Sichuan University, it's also a part of Huaxi or West China Medical University. It's the most famous hospital in the southwest of China. And there are many students being brought in the One Belt, One Road or project to our university from the Middle East, from Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and also Central and Eastern Europe. So this is a pretty, I said I wasn't going to dive deep in these, but okay. So then there's also humanitarian assistance. So this would be China giving humanitarian assistance to Sudan. And not only for COVID, but also for the floods and so forth. And I just wanted to kind of point out here that when China does something like gives humanitarian assistance to Sudan, it doesn't only make Sudan happy, it makes friends of Sudan happy. And for example, the Arab Chinese Friendship Societies League has their executive director is making a public comment that they approve of and are very happy about this humanitarian assistance being given. So there's going to be regional effects. And then there's academic exchange, which I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here with. So the first thing that I think a lot of people think about when they think about China's academic exchanges with other countries is the Confucius Institutes. Especially here in the States, it's been a little bit controversial. This is a screenshot that was fortunately archived. It no longer exists on the web from about 2019. You'll see, I think the number for America is a little bit high there. According to other information that I found in 2019, there were about 123, 124 Confucius Institutes. It is true that half of them, more than half of them have closed in America. Already, but I wanted to point out why is it good that this was archived? Well, it's not available anymore, and why not? Well, if you go to the Hanban website for Confucius Institute, you'll find it no longer exists. Confucius Institutes have been rebranded now as the Center for Language Education and Cooperation, the Zhonghua Yuyan Jiaoliu Hezuo Zhongxin, and they're really changing their programming, rebranding what the Confucius Institutes used to be. And so today in America, there are 51, as of March of this year, there are 51 Confucius Institutes still in America. There are 4 that are slated to close. And I will just mention that there's a fantastic study done by the National Society of Scholars. And they actually pointed out, they did an analysis and produced a report of all of the Confucius Institutes that closed and why, the official reason that was given. And in some cases, there's a lot of elision going on, but in some cases it actually is stated that the university, because it receives money from the Department of Defense, cannot, according to new policy, receive any money. They can't receive that money if they have a Confucius Institute on campus. So that was either directly or indirectly the reason for a good number of those closures. So I had a friend of mine that I was talking about all of this with, and she's like, well, Sophia, there have been educational exchanges going on with China and other countries for a really long time. What's this got to do with One Belt, One Road, with the new Silk Roads? Well, for example, well, 2 points. One, as I mentioned, the new Silk Roads are somewhat of a continuation of earlier Western Development Program and China Goes Global. So a lot of the programs kind of dovetail. But here's an example of one of the biggest programs that the new center that was known as the Confucius Institute formerly is doing, and it's these people-to-people honorary celebration awards where people tell their stories and as people to, talking to people. And if you look at the language, you can see that there's a tie-in here between this and people-to-people connectivity in the New Silk Roads. Move on. So 1990s programs of academic exchange, slightly before Western Development Program and China Goes Global. Those are both, I believe, 1999 programs that they were officially announced. So this 211 is the 100 universities that are going to enter into the 21st century and make a big bang for China. So a lot of funding went into really up-leveling the human resources that China was training. And the 985 project was just a couple of years later, and what that is May of 98. So it was named after that, the 985 project. And I'm pretty sure that I don't have exact proof that my master's and PhD were funded by the 985 project. So these days, directly as a part of the New Silk Roads, we have the BRICS Universities League, and we have the Double First Class University. There's this program that funds my position at Sichuan University at present. So in addition to humanitarian aid, medical aid, there's academic exchange, there's professional exchange, where China is actually making a much more concerted effort to set up vocational training. I know this is particularly prevalent in Africa and in Central Asia. Yeah, I'm not going to dive very, very deeply into that, but I will just add that these are the socioeconomic programs that are really going to be coming into play now that the energy and security and infrastructure projects are reaching maturity. So there's cultural exchange. I have, for an example here, a wonderful example. I recently interviewed Peter Goff, who's one of the directors of the EU-China International Literary Festival. They just held their 5th iteration last November virtually. And so he explained a little bit to me about the finance structure of this festival. It's entirely funded out of Brussels. It's held in Shanghai and Suzhou. I'm not sure if sometimes in Nanjing, but it's very interesting. So Brussels, the EU is funding it, and then China is, except for the 4th iteration when CITIC Bank did contribute some funding, but other than that, what China brings to the table is they host it and they publicize it. So that happens a lot, where either public-private partnership or other governments top down have programming, and then China sort of facilitates it, hosts it, and publicizes it, but doesn't necessarily fund it. That's not always the case, though. And then this is the topic of my next. The rest of the book really, but definitely the 4th and 5th chapter. So I'm not going to get very, very into that today, but creative sector development is a very important part of people-to-people connectivity because it brings in economic engines into the picture. So you've got a lot of private, public-private partnership and public cultural programming going on, trying to develop China's cultural exports, move China up on the value chain, and definitely try to deal with some of the issues of cultural discount that occurs and cultural trade deficit. So development of the creative sector is very important for facing those challenges. Okay, So people to people develops geocultural power, but which people to people does this best? So let me just describe briefly a typology of people to people. I borrow from Kadir Yun Aihan's study at University of Southern California on the typology of people to people. Kadir Yun Aihan speaks of people to people as a form of diplomacy, which is intentional, political, and transboundary communication-based interactions between groups of people for public rather than private interests that have or aim to have foreign implications. This definition excludes PTP interactions which are non-diplomatic, pure international exchanges which do not have political objectives or relevance to foreign policy. So you see that is how Kadir Yun Aihan deals with PTP. She's coming at it from cultural diplomacy and public diplomacy and IA perspective. I am not. I'm coming at this from a cultural perspective. So for me, I would definitely be including PTP that has private interests, that does not have foreign policy implications. So Aihan's PTP interactions exclude much of what China includes in the fifth pillar of the Belt and Road Initiative, such as providing public goods, as well as private sector or public-private partnership, people-to-people development. Although Aihan's analysis does not fit our own exactly, its typology is very useful. In Aihan's analysis, PTP connections are classified in two categories, the first of which is directional. So there's top-down and bottom-up. Top-down interaction are designed as political initiatives meant to influence foreign populations. In our case, we're also looking at how they affect domestic populations. Here we see how Aihan's typology has already advanced beyond the government to government, people-to-people binary, allowing state-mobilized people-to-people diplomacy to target not foreign governments, but populations these governments rule. So I'll just leave that there. And we're concentrating on, we've got top-down, people-to-people cultural programming, and bottom-up, grassroots people-to-people cultural programming. So then bottom-up or grassroots divides into two further categories. And I also get this structure from Aihan's research. So you've got grassroots cultural programming that is entirely in step with, in tune with, in sync with top-down government mobilized cultural programming. So that's called complementary. Now supplementary, and this is really what I focus on, is cultural programming and the cultivation of people-to-people connectivity that exists in an absence of or dearth of arts and culture infrastructure. So when there is none, or there isn't some that we can figure out how to use, we're going to create our own programming, and it's going to be supplementary to top-down and also grassroots complementary. So that's what supplementary people-to-people connectivity is. So, but which people-to-people does this best? Grassroots supplementary people-to-people does this best.